Hey everyone, welcome back to ThursDev. I'm Luke. So, I've spent a lot of time talking about the general roles of people within gaming and done a number of history lessons, but I feel like it's about time I get back into something a little bit more specialized today. And so for this episode of ThursDev, I'd like to talk a little bit about game design philosophy and technique. As I've mentioned previously in my video about getting started as a game designer, the job is a very in-depth and honestly somewhat complicated one. It requires an extreme amount of planning and forethought, as it requires the designer to interpret a number of vague concepts into a form that the player ultimately can interact with. With experience, the designer will always be able to plan for a lot of things up front, but no amount of forethought is going to be enough to always get it right the first time. In my experience, the ratio of mechanics that are left completely unchanged over the course of a project are far outweighed by those that evolve. So, knowing and being at peace with this, I'm an advocate of attempting to make the best of my imperfection and design with failure in mind. There are conflicting schools of thought on the benefits of what's commonly known in the industry as data-driven design, but I'm a big proponent of it. I think that a lot of the game's inner workings neither need to, nor honestly should be exposed to me as a designer, but anything that has any chance of needing modularity should probably at least be put on the table as something worth considering for data-driven structure. But what is data-driven design, or data-driven architecture? In the simplest of terms, data-driven means that something's properties are defined outside of itself. That may already sound a little confusing, but bear with me. When I say data-driven, in the context of games, I mean that although there's a robust set of code implemented on the low end of the project that drives the overall inner workings, most of the player-facing parts of the game can, after the initial legwork has been done, be altered on the fly by someone like, say, a designer, by changing a few values that are predefined. This, of course, has its benefits and drawbacks. The main argument against data-driven design is that exposing variables to non-programmers can and often will lead to things behaving badly, and this argument does in many ways hold water. By definition, a non-programmer has the potential to mess up things that interact with the code when given access to anything within the inner workings of the game, but it also has the potential to be extremely useful to the programmer as well, given a certain amount of trust and mutually agreeing on what is and is not worth making data-driven. The greatest benefit of the data-driven design is as thus. Let's take a very simple design problem. We're given the task of translating into a workable game mechanic the following statement. The player should be able to shoot their gun and have the thing that's shot take damage. It sounds mundane enough, but to any experienced designer you can immediately see an immense checklist of things that need to be fleshed out, even for something as simple as this. Let's break it down into its component parts and what the designer should be considering. The player should be able to shoot off their gun, so obviously this means that the player needs to have a gun. And how many guns are there going to be in the game? How will their stats differ? Some guns might have projectiles with infinite speed. Now this is a lazy solution, but one that we can easily work with. That would mean that the weapon would only need to ray trace from the gun's origin point to a point of impact and apply damage. But let's say that we don't want to be lazy. Then we need to apply projectile speed, however fast that might be, to the equation. And what about ricochet? Now there's some trigonometry that's involved. And if we have automatic weaponry, we're going to want weapon spread, possibly weapon spread that increases as the weapon is fired. Now say that there's a need for a grenade launcher. Now we have a weapon with both limited range and a projectile that needs to take into account the laws of physics. Perhaps it's better to just make all of our projectiles physics-based objects, remove ray tracing altogether, and just project the projectile forward using all of its parameters, and apply other special rules to certain projectiles like explosions. Now explosions, generally speaking, are going to mean an area of effect radius, because calculating realistic shrapnel will be a nightmare of its own that I'd rather not try to get into for the sake of a video. We'll probably want to disallow or at least lessen the damage depending on whether the explosion is interrupted by something like a wall. And should we consider wall materials? Or are we okay with a piece of particle board on a sawhorse providing the same defensive benefit as a 2-foot thick concrete wall? If those objects are discrete props, how are they affected by the explosion? There are also things like ammo capacity, ammo type, ammo model if we want to represent it with anything but a particle ribbon. And that's just the bullet. And there are a ton more things to consider even there, but what about the damage bit? we obviously need a stat system, at least a value that tracks how many hit points our target has. That means that our projectiles need to have a base damage value upon impact unless we want to get fancy with the velocity-based math, which again, video. So that means that each gun, assuming only one ammo type, and oh yeah, do we need more than one ammo type per weapon? Requires probably a projectile speed value and a damage value. Well, every character, if not also every other possibly destructible prop in the game, requires a stat that can be altered by this damage value. If we factor in things like armor, we need the math to make that work, and so on and so forth into the night. Like I said, lots to consider, but that's just to translate the line, "we need a gun that shoots things and hurts them." To be fair, this is the central mechanic of an awful lot of games, so I'm sort of minimizing that by describing it the way that I do, but my point stands that even a simple mechanic like injuring people with guns deserves an extreme amount of forethought before it can go into a game. This stands true for all but the most trivial mechanics within a game. So let's say that we've put as much thought as we can into this entire shooting system. We've created a system by which the game accepts a projectile velocity to calculate the speed the projectile should travel, and then the projectile collides with something, it should apply damage as defined in its stats. We want bullets to travel through weak cover, so certain items reduce damage output of the projectile and slow its velocity, but otherwise allows it to travel onward. If we're feeling sassy, we can even add in a little bit of gravity for the sake of perceived realism. We've got a half-decent gun system that also meaningfully interacts with the environment and actors, and we've got, let's say, 5 guns out of that. We show it to the executive or creative lead, and lo and behold, they want 10 guns. The process of increasing our number of weapons could be arduous or trivial, depending on how we design the game up front and how the programming team have implemented that design. No matter what we do, there's an artist who's going to have more work to do because sadly there's significantly fewer ways to minimize an artist's workload, though there are some, like creating modular pieces that can be used to assemble new models. But if we planned correctly, which is not to say we had 5 extra guns up our sleeve just in case, but that we made it so that we could add more guns easily if necessary, we're in good shape. I imagine some people might take umbrage with this turn of phrase, but I call it designing to fail. I've been involved in the development of over 20 shipped games over the course of my career to date, and I can't recall a single one that ended up not changing at least a reasonable percentage from design to delivery. I have, however, seen a few that suffered because they weren't anticipating having to change. By swallowing our pride as designers and accepting that we're likely not going to get it right the first time, maybe not even the first few times, we can instead plan to create something that will accommodate our failures and allow us to work better. Data-driven design is a grand manifestation of this because by having the programmer create a system by which a new gun entity can be defined and then leaving the projectile attributes, ammo attributes, and associated models in the hands of the designers, they've minimized their future workload thanks to relinquishing a little extra control to us. This isn't all about programmers buying into data-driven design, however, and you likely won't meet a single designer who isn't on board with the idea of the concept, so that's not it either. The point that I'm attempting to get across is that we should embrace our fallibility and create our projects to accommodate it. I'm a seasoned designer. If you ask me to create a system from an existing game and I know what that game is, I can do that for you, probably without much trouble. But anytime you need to create something new, there's always, every time, without fail, going to be things that you just kind of have to assume. And some of the time those assumptions will be wrong, or at the very least need tweaking at some point. If every tweak or new feature requires a significant time investment from someone else in your team, then that cuts down on the overall agility of your group as a whole. And in an industry that relies on guesswork as much as ours does, because no amount of social engineering and research is going to be a perfect indicator of what does and doesn't work, minimizing the amount of hardship we face when we do inevitably need a do-over is going to mean the difference of a few minutes of work to as much as a few days. As always, though, when making a game, communication is key, and as a designer, the better you understand your team and the better they understand you, the fewer headaches everyone's going to have later on down the line. Ideally, you'll have to have the rapport with your programming team to be able to make something like this work, but I hope that you get the opportunity, because I think that you'll find that if your team is willing to meet you halfway on this, everyone involved is going to be much happier on the way out. And that's it for me for today. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you found this video informative, if not at least interesting. If shiny red buttons are a thing that interests you, then there's one down below this video that says subscribe that you might just want to click. It'll give you notifications about whenever I upload a new video, of which I do every day. Both informative videos every Thursday and Sunday, and lighthearted Let's Plays on the rest of the week. Don't feel obligated though, I'm just glad that you stuck with me to the end. Have a great day, and I hope I'll catch you again soon. Take care.